look at my video. My video.
Hey, look at that. Starting on time, and we're all set up and ready to go. It's going to be a bad hair day, but we'll make it through that. Let's see here. I've got Michael. I've invited you up to interview mode, so you should be able to get up there on camera so we can see your whiteboard. Thank you so very much. And so, hello, everyone. My name's Chris Hewer, and this is Waymakers Live, and I'm very proud to be joined today by Michael Moon and William Leiter. Bill Leiter. Hey, Bill, you updated your name on the app. That's great, too. So good to see you. And we've got a fresh picture, so that's what you actually look like. You don't look like one of those little bald emojis. So very, very good. Hey, go ahead, Michael. You're on video.
You have your Zoom mic on.
Thank you so very much. Sorry about that. We have a back channel running, and I have just overwhelmed it. So sorry about that for your ears, fellas. Very, very good to have you here. Hey, last week we had a terrific conversation that surfaced so many things within this What Will It Take process. For those of you just joining us, we have been doing Waymakers now for, oh my gosh, Michael, can you believe this? We're coming up on 6 months that we actually started doing this back in May of earlier this year, an emergent sort of conversation about making way in this post-pandemic reality, in this emerging world of great opportunities, and in particular, what it would take to live an epic life, to transform the world, to transform your organization, to make it a better place. Now, it's much more than that, and there's so much more deeper in that. And what we've been focused on the last couple of weeks is what will it take for organizations to retain their top talent in the age of the Great Resignation with all of this chaos going on. And so in that respect, we're talking to organizational leaders, CEOs of probably mid-sized companies, although actually company size probably doesn't matter so much. Most CEOs have a similar set of challenges right now. Unfortunately, there are very few who are really set up for success in this. But they have shown us what can be done. They've shown us what's possible. And in fact, that is actually the key underlying neuroscience secrets of the What Will It Take process, as we tap into neuroscience to help people imagine the impossible to make it more probable. And that's a very short-circuited way of explaining it. There's a lot more to the neuroscience, obviously. But last week, we actually uncovered something that was quite fascinating and exciting and really it was powerful sort of insight that came out of this process. So we want to go into that a little bit more today. And this was actually coming out of a thought that Bill had and that Michael exploded. Michael, would you like to go ahead and introduce the topic for today and get us started here?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. And welcome, everyone. I want to set up the conversation around the inherent unity of culture, corporate culture, brand, and values in action. Now, to put that in context, I want to first introduce kind of the epic, the epic background. I submit that the world in which we are making our way is a world of increasing acceleration and complexity. Against that, we have companies, large and small, that are all driving towards a transformational outcome. And the top level is what we call connected consumption. Connected consumption is where customers are now always connected with their trusted providers, and they've created a closed loop, data driven insight feedback loop. So examples are like Netflix, Amazon, Haier, GE Appliance, Tesla, Apple, and so on. And so as we use their products increasingly on a subscription basis, it creates a data insight feedback loop that drives continuous optimization. So connected consumption is one of those epic themes that will perhaps provide clarity in terms of our opportunities today.
And actually, Michael, I think that connected consumption requires like a multiple series
of I just wanted to put a spin on it.
For sure.
And then the flip side of that is the customer connected platform. And that is essentially the infrastructure for today's company. So against that, the big insight that we came out of last week is that when we focus on values in action, oftentimes we look at values or values in action, walking the talk, really embodying and bringing into the day-to-day decision-making and prioritization a mission, vision, and values of an organization. And how do we make that, and how do we bring co-ownership to that?
See, that's huge.
Action is a way by which to start understanding our culture and the ability of our culture to perform to the need to achieve these oftentimes transformational objectives.
Okay, so now we set up the sort of gist of it, or the grist, actually. But you can move to your right a little bit. And what I'd just love you to do is just, without going into all the depth, just walk through the whiteboard in this graphic, because I think this is so insightful. And hopefully people will get it, but just walk through what it is. You don't need to go into the depth right now.
Sure. So we've got values in action. And values and actions are expressed in the world in two dimensions. Externally as your brand, and internally as your culture.
Awesome.
And in fact, they are, culture and brand are two sides of the same coin, values in action. And then components or systems that drive the brand and culture are things like customer success and business ecosystems, as well as product and infrastructure.
Yep.
So then we say, okay, well, how do we navigate this? How do we drive this? Ultimately, from a culture side, internal side, it's leadership. And so how effective is leadership in creating what Bill will introduce later as aligned readiness, the day-to-day living of the mission, vision, and values of the company, as well as owning the strategic objectives and the ways in which we collaborate and get stuff done. But outward, I'm characterizing this, I'm introducing a new term, stakeholding, which is co-ownership, right? And so how do we get customers to create a stakehold in the organization? And that is the essence of branding.
Well, not even so much to create it, they already have it, it's invisible, but to activate it, to actually have it as an active, conscious kind of thought in their lives, right?
Sure. So again, to frame this up and then to move it on, what are the constituent elements? How do they interact? And specifically, what are some meaningful implications for management action to facilitate being the best that we can, the best that we are, against the backdrop of how do we create brands that are essentially expressing connected consumption, and then kind of the systems and processes and the people, process, technology of these platforms, these customer connected platforms. And so how do we, what's the job, what are the jobs to be done by leadership and team members for really moving developing a more mature capability of this customer connected platform?
Now, let me just interject and break the fourth wall for a second here and talk to everyone in here in the audience. Part of what we're doing here is an emergent sort of experience. So we're going to have changes, we're going to have ideas, and in fact, we'd like to invite you up if you have something to share or add, to ask a question or to add more to it. So make sure that this is a little bit more meeting your needs as opposed to ours. But the reason why I wanted to actually say that is because Michael just shared this with me for the first time yesterday, and we talked about it briefly this morning. But I do have one suggested change on this, and I know why you have customer connected platforms, but I would suggest that's the connected ecosystem platform on that side for the internal, because it's pulling in the partners and connecting them with customers and connecting the partners' customers
Right.
with our core products as well.
Agree completely.
Okay. Now, the other thing here that I'm really getting at is that
let's bring Bill's perspective.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to do.
So Bill Leiter has been a CEO of a publicly held firm. He's a consultant's consultant, a master class consultant, and has advised hundreds of CEOs on various organizational transformations. He has a consulting group called the Axis Group. And so Bill, we really want to bring Bill in here we get all the arm waving, we get all the buzzwords and these nice kind of graphics, but I'm now going to bottom line it as a CEO okay, separate the hype, separate all the fancy words. What does this mean? And how does this frame new opportunities, new shots on goal, new ways of moving our company forward? Bill.
Good morning. Thank you. Big question. How do we turn theory into practice? There's an old adage that says, in theory and practice ought to align. In real life, they never do. What do we do? Well, in a practical sense, what we've created is what we call a model or structure for a balanced organization. The elements of balance are vision, values-driven leadership, culture, strategy, and your greater purpose. Vision and greater purpose create the moral and visionary guardrails, if you will, for how we stay focused at all times. Our values, our beliefs defined by our actions, can be changed or modified. We know neuroscientifically can be changed or modified whenever the need or desire arises. The values we grew up with don't have to be the values we're stuck with or committed to. And we've heard many people say all the time, well, this is who I am and I can't change. And that's not true. Yes, you can. And there we get a whole lot of issues, or a whole lot of elements like neuroplasticity, the rewiring of neurons and synaptic connections in the brain to learn and become new things and behave in new ways. So all these things are possible. Values-driven leadership is simply holding and living values that have people be measurably accountable. And if you want the number one horror story for how that didn't work, look at Wells Fargo Bank.
Yeah. So that's actually what I wanted to get into a little bit with you. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff I want to get with you, but let's finish on this thread before we go back to the graphic that Michael shared here. So this idea of values-driven leadership. Well, I think it's actually, first of all, just to be clear, it's a mindset first, that we're actually going to live our values. People have to buy into that, and leaders need to be committed to that. So that's step number one. But you pointed out that they need to be measurable. How do we measure values in action?
Measurement is determined by whether or not and to what extent we have values that can be measured behaviorally. And this is where the whole term, soft skills comes into play. Now, I argue that there's no such thing as soft skills. what are referred to as soft skills are simply the skills whose outcomes, whose results are not reflected on our traditional linear financial reporting. They're reflected behaviorally, like values like integrity. What do you mean when you say integrity? Well, my short definition, working definition, is making and keeping commitments and doing the right thing.
Yeah, very much so.
You
Yeah, it's
know,
like, how do you measure alignment? I mean, you can take it all the way to the top line and the bottom line, but is there a way to go in and measure how aligned your people are?
sure. Well, you can first start by measuring how aligned your values are with.
Excuse me, Bill. Would you hold your microphone closer to your mouth?
Is that better?
Way better.
Okay. We can measure. Now you can hear me coughing.
Yes.
Uh, we can measure how aligned our values are with our vision and with our strategic objectives. And as Peter Drucker famously once said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what he meant by that is that the cultural norms and behaviors, and by the way, we define culture as simply why, how, and what you do what you do.
Why, how, and why you do what you do.
Yes.
Okay.
And
It is something that's abstract for so many people. So trying to put it in those simple terms is very helpful.
and it's a collective. There's always outliers in organizations, and when organizations grow, that population grows. But as long as you've got as a rule of thumb, if you've got 80% of your people working diligently and constructively and within the boundaries of these six elements of balance, you've got a high functioning team. You've got a high functioning organization. And we always look to measure achievement as a comparison to your potential, not necessarily to, how's our competition doing, what's the market doing, et cetera, and so forth.
Well, we need an entire show dedicated to benchmarking and the folly and the value, because there is some in it, but it's a lot of folly as well.
Yes.
So, Bill, I think that warrants just unpack a little bit. So, you're saying that measuring culture, measuring values in action,
Yes.
is really about measuring uh, uh, current levels of achievement or output versus our potential, as opposed to benchmarking this to peer competitors.
Correct.
So, aside from the fact that it's probably easier conceptually, mechanically, to measure our outputs to some other company's output, aside from the ease factor or whatever cognitive bias that would frame, what's the in your experience advising CEOs? What is the principal barrier to making that shift to being externally benchmarked to being internally benchmarked? What's the challenge?
The basic challenge is that too many CEOs don't really know how their organizations are performing relative to the six elements of balance that I've laid out. And so when you don't know how you stack up to those yardsticks, those elements, you oftentimes create a set of strategies that don't really reflect or coincide with your organization's, your culture's capability to achieve those objectives. So you work a lot harder, spend a lot more money, and your achievements either don't meet your strategic objectives or they cost way more in money and time to get there.
So you're saying that as a function that because most CEOs do not have a grounded, fact-based baseline understanding measurement of their culture and its performance, they put their attention elsewhere and over-index in strategy and effort and so on, without taking into consider, and as a function of not knowing, right?
It's a function of not knowing, yes.
Okay. Now, from a neuroscience perspective, how does the brain deal with that dilemma of not knowing and perhaps not knowing that you don't know?
Well, the short answer is not very well. Uh, Now, what does that look like? Well, first of all, some of the syndromes, some of the behaviors that we see, the bar for achievement is set too low.
Mm.
So you celebrate mediocrity and you call it brilliance. You call it exceptional, and really, it's just okay.
Well, that's the pandemic that's faced corporations over the last couple of decades, it seems.
Right. And if you're a public company, you simply focus on other things, shareholder expectations for the creation of shareholder wealth. Period.
Mm.
And if that's the only thing you look at, then you're going to be condemned to live in 90-day bubbles where your focus, a major portion of your focus, is directed at your next earnings report. And companies brag, profitable for the last 45 quarters.
Yep.
And
So you're saying that as a function of not having a good data-based, fact-based assessment of culture and its ability to perform to achieve objectives, two, the CEO's brain will go, well, I'm going to focus on what it is that I do understand. Two, it's also then heavily biased as a function of this 90-day bubble of quarterly results. So that seems like a perfect storm for oblivion, which is to say, I don't know about culture. I pick it up non-verbally, anecdotally, but I don't have a culture plan, nor am I looking at culture as a resource to harness. It's just something I deal with.
correct. And you deal with it in a number of ways. And again, we get into some neuroscientific aspects, behavioral science aspects, and some emotional intelligence about how these things all come into being. And one of the things we don't like as humans and as leaders, we don't like change because it's uncomfortable. It's disruptive to our system.
Yeah.
Also is threatening, especially when you have to listen to ideas that you don't agree with.
Mm.
And so when that happens and that takes over, then you've pretty much put a lid on the amount of cultural diversity that you can tolerate. And when you do that, then you lose creativity. And when you lose creativity, you begin to become less and less relevant. And when you cross that Rubicon, you're Sears.
Got it. Well, and as you've said, it's every organization or every organizational leader has some sort of transformative goal, and that's really what we're exploring here. The biggest of transformative goals. For those of you just joining us, this is Waymakers Live, and I'm Chris Hewer, and I'm joined again by Michael Moon and Bill Leiter, and we're deeply exploring what it will take to transform organizations to achieve their full potential. And what we've kind of hit upon here and where we've been going into so far this morning is an expansion of a thought from last week, that values in action are reflected in our brand externally and in our culture internally. So what we've actually done, if I can break this back down to the question of what will it take, is we've identified a common root cause across all aspects of the organization that can be focused on and improved that will be the lever to improve the brand experience, to improve our product, to improve our operational infrastructure, to improve our partner ecosystem, to bring it all together and manifest it to its greatest potential. And what Bill's been talking about is the 6 elements of balance from his book, Mastering Your Balance, and how this is an area that most CEOs don't focus on necessarily because it's not a problem. Now, one of the things we brought up last week was the fact that when things are going well, we don't tend to look at these new sorts of things and these other ways of doing things. But even if things are going well, those values in action may be producing some awkward results. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael in a second, but for those of you in the audience, if anyone has a question or would like to share some thoughts, please raise your hand and we'll bring you up here on stage to join us in a minute or two.
Bill, bringing forward our conversation from last week, you made the rather simple but perhaps audacious claim that if you're growing more or less at the rate of the market, you're losing. And that today organizations must have a plan, perhaps not the central plan, but a plan for how do we change the game? How do we disrupt our market? How do we change? How do we grow 2 times or 3 times in the next year or two? So that's more of a disruptive or transformational objective. Can you build upon that and bring that down to kind of like the choices and challenges that most CEOs face today?
Okay, well, let's go back to the first part of that statement,
Sure.
and that is growing at the same rate as the market is growing. That is a ticket to complacency because you're coasting. The market is carrying you along. You know, a rising tide floats all boats, right? So you can pretty much phone it in, and in fact, that's what you're doing. So the motivation, the urge to be creative simply doesn't live there. When you first ask, you must begin by asking the question, what would it take to grow at X% greater than the market rate? And then you really have to get deeply into the discovery part of that question. What would it take? Well, are we a market that is still growing? Are we living in a market that is reasonably healthy but declining, and it's ticketed for obsolescence at some point? We don't know exactly when, but we're going to ride it for as long as we can. So you have to first have a really, really good grasp on the characteristics of your market and your products and services in relationship to that market.
And I think most CEOs of firms, most, not all, but most would say, yeah, we collectively, and I in particular, have domain expertise. I know my customers. I know my market. In fact, privately, just on the side, if you really ask me, I've forgotten more about this than you'll ever know. So therefore,
well, they have forgotten more than I'll ever know. That's true, but more about what? More about what they already know how to do. That's not growth. That's not learning growth, and that's not organizational growth.
Good point.
So when you interrogate the market, interrogate the outliers, interrogate the people that are only using your product because it's the best of what's currently available, but it doesn't really address their emerging needs. Understand your customers better and more than you define them by how they use your product or how they use your service. Banks, for example, have attempted to do that at various stages by offering a variety of other services, some of which got them into trouble and some of which expanded their growth. The financial community as a whole is constantly trying to invent new products, some of which are great, some not so much. but there's this quest for continuous expansion of the service offering to touch more of their customers' lives. So one question that you might want to ask yourself is, what should you be looking at instead of or in addition to market share? And oftentimes it's mind share.
Mm-hmm.
How much?
Yeah, it's attention. It's earning loyalty by earning the attention of our individuals. That's where I actually am still a big fan of one of the best ways of measuring it is through attention measurement. There's some things going on right now in the crypto space around the basic attention token. Of course, I was previously involved in the attention markup language movement, at least as a supporter evangelist for that. And that's something that we're starting to get a better measurement on. But as we're moving into the second half of Waymakers Live for today, Wednesday, November 17th, oh my goodness, can't believe we're already so close to Thanksgiving. What I'm actually coming back to is I want to come back to centralize and see if we can produce a couple of more answers instead of insights. And I think inside the stories, you actually have shared some answers, but I want to make it more explicit and clear for our audience here. And so let me ask you this question, Bill. What will it take for a CEO to energize their values in action to take it up a notch, to take it to the next level?
The short
How do you, as a transformational leader, energize that sector of your business that might have been neglected over the last several years or since its beginning even?
Well, all businesses are organic. So it's true that growth or improvement can be incremental, but they have to be part of a larger organic ecosystem. And that's what we have used the 6 elements to define, is what is the ecosystem of the organization. So when you isolate one thing, you can't really isolate it completely. You have to look at it in terms of how it impacts all the other elements. Yeah. What are our values? The values that we currently live, what are they doing to attract diversity of thought in our employees? What are they doing to get employees to stay longer and contribute more? How do our values work to get employee ownership of what we're doing? Yeah. So you have to look at not just the thing, but the implications of what it creates. What effects does it create? Direct and tangential.
So, Bill, one of the things that you introduced was you said that the CEO has a mindset, and it's a little bit like the walls of an aquarium. They are constraints, but you can't see it. Now, and occasionally you'll get an enlightened fish going, I know there are walls, I know there are mindsets, I know that I don't know, help. So that's one. So they go, so there's now a meta cognition of, I know what I know, but there's something more that I'm missing that could change things. So there's that general recognition of we could do better. Then out of that general recognition we could do better, they kind of look around for, well, what are my options? And there's a range of options, and we can talk about those later. But the one in particular is, there's this, what would it take mindset of really uncovering what would it take to have be 5 times larger in 2 years. Something that would be truly impossible, but as a thought experiment would be great to clarify unconscious biases, self-limiting beliefs, and our current level of comfort with the known, the mediocre, and the socially acceptable. So out of that recognition, we could do better, and that there is something that we might explore in terms of what would it take to be 5 times larger in 2 years, or two times larger in 1 year. Something that's again a provocation. It's a catalyst. It's a perturbation of this complex system by which to start to poke at the edges of my mindset. Then you said that next was then to do an assessment, a culture assessment, right?
Well, a balance assessment.
A balance assessment. And this is assessment we had talked in the past is really looking at a relative degree of aligned readiness in terms of what you're doing now and what it could be and what we could be. Not externally benchmarked, but just in terms of who we are, what's our potential. Would you unpack that assessment? So, what are some of the cognitive strategies and outputs and implications that come from this assessment?
Okay, so let me address that in a couple of ways. First of all, let me go back into your earlier point about how do we just look at, what do we do to create a growth rate that's far larger than we've historically done or that we believe we can do. So let me give you one quick war story, and it's very basic. It happened at a big four consulting firm. They were closing 25% of their proposals. That's not a good closing rate. Their cost to create the proposals was significant. Only closing 25% meant that the 25% they closed had to carry the acquisition costs, the client acquisition cost of all.
So, Bill, just as a footnote, there are some people in the consulting area that will go, "Hey, a 25% growth rate is not bad. I'm good with that."
It's terrible.
And you're saying, and in terms of what it could be, it's terrible.
It's terrible. So let me tell you what we did. And here was a self-limiting belief that we came smack up against. And that was they had a whole section of every proposal, a boilerplate section that said, why us? And then they had 15 pages of why us and talked about all the great things that they did and were and could do, et cetera. None of those things focused on the client needs. They were already invited to make a proposal because the client already knew who they were. They didn't need to know again.
Yep.
So we changed all that, and we spent more time in the creation of the proposal to study the client's needs and to study the client's desired outcomes and beyond. And we put that into the proposal. Here's how we can focus specifically on your needs and opportunities. Here's the way we're going to help you, not how we've helped millions, how we're going to help you. We closed 75%.
Well, it would seem to me that that was their values in action as well, that became a self-limiting belief, that their values in action was that they were so important, that they were more important part of the story than the solution they were going to present to the client.
Or they believed, as a function of the guy that was in the corner office, that their brand was so strong that if they just showed up and said, the brand has landed, here we are, they should get 75% of the deal.
Yeah, that's closer to the point. It's not so much a reflection of values as a certain level of arrogance. Now, IBM fell prey to that a long time ago, where, hey, we're IBM. Why would you choose anybody else? And they damn near went bankrupt at one point in the 90s. They became complacent, fat, dumb, and happy, and it took a whole cultural restructuring, but not a focus. They didn't change their focus. They have three core values, all focused on customer outcomes. And they went from 200,000 employees or 250,000 employees down to 100 and back up again. And they're in 70 countries, and they're solid. The point is that the improvement, the change began from within.
Yep.
That's critical. It begins from within. You have to begin with introspection. You can't begin this process by only looking outward. It doesn't work.
So bring that back to how you use the cultural assessment as a mechanism for facilitating that introspection.
Well, it puts a "you are here" dot on the map. This is who we are as an organization. This is our vision. These are our values. This is what we live. This is how we hold or don't hold people accountable. Accountability is oftentimes selective, and that's a big no-no. Um, this is what our culture looks like. This is how we perform. There's cultural disciplines are amazingly simple. For example, a great indicator of one of the efficiencies of your culture is how you conduct meetings.
Mm,
Start on time. What topics are discussed? What do you do in a meeting that could best be done by sending everybody an email?
yeah.
Uh, do people in meetings all speak? Do we make decisions in meetings? Do we hold people accountable? Do we set goals? How do meetings work? That will give you so much insight about your greater culture. Just that one little element. It's microscopic and it has huge
So important.
implications.
Well, again, it seems like, and as we're touching on this more, or as we're going more deeply into this here, that culture is actually how we, and you said this earlier, but I really want to emphasize this, it's how we work with others.
Yes.
That is our values in action. And that's what we see. Michael, if you can move to the right again so you can point out the board behind you. That is why we see our values in action being reflected in the brand and within the culture, and why these values and actions, by understanding and seeing it in an objective way without all those biases, can be so powerful. Hey, I have Stephen.
Bill, I submit that meetings is absolutely a microcosm for the values in action, and that most companies are not conscious, deliberate, and persistent in managing meetings as a resource.
Correct. You are correct.
So
Even
it's
thinking about meetings as a resource, Michael. I mean, who thinks meetings as a resource?
well,
But it is.
Andy Grove, in his book High Output Management, talked about meetings are the principal medium of managerial action. So if you're a manager, it is incumbent upon you. In fact, Grove went to the point to saying it's a moral imperative that you have great meetings in your organization, and that is your responsibility.
Yes.
So, okay, so we want to establish, and let's do a whole session on meetings.
Well, that's what Stephen wants to ask a little bit.
So
more.
I have a question about meetings. Most of the time, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, welcome. Stephen Gans, one of our friends and collaboratory members. Thanks for joining us, Stephen.
Thank you, Chris. Most of the time, meetings come down to becoming guessathons. People are just throwing out guesses, and then people are just following and making decisions based on who's senior in the room. How do we turn meetings into experimental, where we actually can experience what we're talking about, and then firsthand speak from experience by prototyping?
Well,
So, Stephen, it seems to me that there are a collection of various types of meetings. There are some meetings that are really about getting everybody up to speed, like a daily stand-up or a weekly review. There are other meetings that are really about problem solving. We've got a problem here. Let's collectively ask how we can make this go faster, easier. How can we make it simpler? How can we make it more multiplicative or engaging? There are other meetings that are, by design and intent, experimental. What would it take? What would it take to do this? Or, hey, what's going on here? So it seems to me that there's not a one size fits all meeting, but there's at least 5, maybe 10 different structurally, linguistically distinguished meetings, and that we need protocols and consistent adherence to protocols for that type of meeting. Bill, did you want to build upon that?
I agree with that. You are correct. And there's a couple of cardinal rules. One is that leaders speak last. because one of the dangers of collectively engaging is that we devolve into groupthink.
Yeah.
Yep.
We want to avoid groupthink. So one of the ways, there's a couple of ways to do that. One is, again, leaders speak last, and the other thing is that no idea that is expressed at a meeting, no thought goes unexamined. Oftentimes, the dumbest ideas, seemingly the dumbest when they're initially expressed, lead to the creative breakthroughs that everybody's hoping for.
Totally agreed, Bill. And if I may, Michael.
On that. So you're saying that in a meeting, there are institutional or cultural roles that must be performed or should be performed in order for this organization to operate at its potential. And one of the things that you're saying that in a meeting, there needs to be like an integrity monitor, like a timekeeper, like there's a timekeeper, but there's somebody there that's going, that's a great idea, and let's either time box it or put it on the agenda, or let's explore it. But there are roles to be performed in meetings with purpose. And that for the most part, well, we come into these meetings and like Stephen was saying, it's a guess-a-thon. It's kind of like, well, I'll just throw out a bunch of bullshit and see if people like it.
Well, here's what has to happen over time. First of all, when every idea is taken seriously, people will start to take themselves seriously.
Yeah.
So when somebody says, well, they come up with an idea that, everybody in the room is groaning. But instead of saying, well, that's really not appropriate, or, let's explore that. Where would you like to go with that idea? Let's take the next step. Let's unpack it. Let's see where it takes us. And people can see that.
They can see inclusion and action.
Yeah, they can see the implications of
they
their
can feel it.
thoughts. And when you're sitting in a meeting with your peers and maybe some people higher than you in the org chart and lower, and you see that your words are taken seriously, and your thoughts are taken seriously, and they're expanded, you're going to spend a lot more time preparing for the next meeting.
Yeah.
And you're not going to come in with some bullshit idea just to kill time and make yourself noticeable.
In the reverse, when those ideas are not taken seriously, and the people that in a prior organization I worked with were often kindly referred to as hippos, the highly important people, sometimes self-important people, as the case may be, when they speak, that's gospel. So that does prevent all that other inclusion. But I want to come back up a little.
Google is the highest paid person in the room, which goes to the status bias of like deferring to person that's the highest status.
That's
my millennials taught me something different, but that's okay. But what I wanted to get to is bring this back up a level instead of at the tactical level, because again, we're talking about what will it take.
There was one thing I wanted to put on the board here, and then we can start, bringing it up.
And also, I see Stephen has another question or comment he wants to put in as well. So,
well, why don't we go with Stephen? Stephen?
Yeah. So, focusing on problem-solving meetings and the idea of experiment, that means that you have to have a culture which applauds failure rather than punishes failure.
Yes.
How do we get such organizations, Bill?
Well, first of all, I think it starts by reframing.
Hold on, Michael, if I may.
It starts.
He was asking Bill.
It starts by reframing not failure, but discovery. So we are committed to discovery as a function of curiosity, of considering possibilities. Now,
I like that word.
So it's not a culture or a mindset of failure. That's bullshit. I'm so sorry. That's bullshit. And I know there's a whole bunch of culture of failure, fail fast, and that's all a bunch of Silicon Valley horseshit. All right, it's
not. It's
of
just
curiosity, of discovery, of what if.
Bill, what's your take on it?
Stephen, go back and restate your question, Stephen.
So a lot of problem-solving meetings are, as I was suggesting, guessathons. To cut out the guesswork, you have to build a prototype of some sort, a minimal viable product or service, so that you see what it really looks like. And when you do a lot of them quickly, some of them won't work. And that should be applauded. And I agree with Michael, that is a process of discovery given the proper framing. And the question is, how do you build an organization based upon continual discovery?
So, Stephen,
That's great.
you're asking a really good question that has multiple answers at multiple levels in the organization. But here's one that comes quickly to mind. What if you adopted one of your core values as we value ideas? How do you value ideas? Well, you celebrate them for starters. You celebrate them and the people who brought them forward. And so looking at failure versus discovery, that's good and that's appropriate. But what about celebrating the person that brought the idea forward that failed, and raising them to a level of recognition, giving them recognition for their courage, for their resourcefulness, for their out of the box thinking, for suggesting something that in and of itself didn't work, but led to three more things that did. So you don't just examine the idea itself and judge it. You examine all of its implications, including the person or persons who brought it forward. How do you celebrate and recognize those people? What do you do? Mention in a newsletter.
Bill, what I saw in a startup that was really bringing being intentional about this curiosity, discovery, and so on, is they had a part of their Friday week in review. First of all, they had a suggestion box, but it wasn't a suggestion box, but it was a crazy idea that just might work. So there was a call company wide to put suggestions into the hopper of a wacky, crazy idea that just might work. And those then were read aloud in the weekly review, and they really positioned it more like stand-up comedy, which is to say, wow, that's a crazy idea. Wow, wow, who did that? Oh, Nancy did that, etc. So what they did is they turned it into a ritual and then delivered as comedy, which, when you get into the neurolinguistics of comedy, it is about the sudden recognition that I am no longer beholden to some bullshit lame norm. And it's the recognition that is the payoff.
And,
so
and
by
recognition
turning this into a comedy, a bit comedy, or a sketch comedy almost, a one-liner comedy, you were able to celebrate creativity and have it be collective.
And the recognition is always positive.
Absolutely. And that's why one of the guys came from improv, and it was always yes and, as opposed to no but. It was always yes and. How can we build on that? It was always building on it. Last point, and I just want to throw it in here and then see how it kind of moves forward. And that is storytelling. I submit that narrative intelligence and storytelling are a critical, essential, underused, misused resource for culture vitalization, corporate maintenance. And that I propose that in the future we expand on corporate storytelling and how that is so instrumental to having a culture that performs to its best. Now, there was somebody else who wanted to come in here. No.
I didn't see anybody else raise their hands, but that's okay. But we'd love to have you because we're at 7 minutes left, so we're coming to wrap up here at the top of the hour. So much to do, and this is such a complex sort of thing. In fact, these are now, and I think this is seen more. Michael, please.
How about if we kind of do a recap called
Yes.
What were the things that we got out of here today? So just we'll make a list of what were our takeaway points. What's one takeaway point?
Oh, my notes are kind of a mess here on my whiteboard here.
Audience members, what was it? What was anyone either text or come in? What was one takeaway point that you got out of this?
Anyone could love to have somebody come up from the audience and share what it is that you've learned from today, or anything that you still would like to learn from today.
Is that culture and brands are part of values in action.
Yes. Super. The most important point.
Another one was meetings are a mechanism of culture building or of culture, and that they require more conscious intent and adherence to best practices or how we do meetings. What was another thing that came out of today?
Well, there's a ton again, and I'm trying to figure out today versus over the past couple of weeks, which is where I'd love somebody from the audience to come up. Please join us.
One was that we're going to reframe failure to
huge.
a culture of curiosity, inclusion, and celebration of creativity. Great. What's another thing that we learned today?
Well, it's a weird thing, and I just addressed this straight on. Thank you very much, first of all, for being able to summarize this today, because usually I'm much better at it. But I'm looking through my notes, and my notes are a bunch of things I didn't get to bring up.
Is that most CEOs are entangled in a 90-day bubble.
I think that's great.
Quarterly results, right?
Yep.
Great. With other cognitive biases. Another one that Bill brought forward was proposals are best about how we solve or actually.
Well, again, it was customer centricity.
How we frame and solve your problems and address possibilities, etc.
Well, and again, it comes back to this idea of it's a really important point of customer centricity and showing that your customers are more important than we are, so to speak, if you will, to remove the arrogance.
Got one, Bill?
No, I'm listening. I keep coming back to my default position, which is you need to know where and how you behave relative to the 6 elements of balance. Sure. And that becomes your starting line.
So basically what you're saying is that you need a fact-based
objective
assessment of culture.
No, of the 6 elements of balance.
6 elements of balance. Okay? And lacking that will send leadership off in the wrong direction, or send them off in a direction that will only reinforce what got them there as opposed to what will get you where they need to be in the future.
Correct.
The last thing I want to summarize here is that narrative intelligence.
Yes.
Is essentially business storytelling And this is a way under used resource.
Yeah.
Cool.
I want to come back to the heart of it. First of all, thank you very much for that, Michael. That's very helpful, and it's something I think we should do every show. But we're here at the end. We can go a couple minutes over, so we will, if you don't mind. But what I wanted to get at here is that we've been asking for the past several months, really, what will it take to create the greatest possible organization? And I don't know what we call it. Greatest possible organization isn't great words per se to choose, not very precise, but it's aspirational and directional, and at least hopefully you understand what we're talking about. And for me, as I'm looking at this, and I look at this more deeply, and particularly the other side, over the past couple of weeks, what we've really hit upon is what it will take is an examination of your organizational values in action and a decision to be more intentional about what those values need to be, and then to change the environment in which it is happening, where we have already hit upon the idea that an organization has a strong operational plan typically that's missing that cultural plan. So what we actually come to is an understanding of what our values and actions actually are objectively that will lead us to the ability to create a plan, a cultural plan specifically, that will be supplemental and exponentially supportive of your operational plan. Because it's about how humans actually work with each other, not about how systems work with each other. Although, of course, system design and system thinking is a good part of it. So that's just kind of my big takeaway at all of this now as we're looking at this and after the past couple of weeks. Is there anything in there that I've actually missed with that in terms of trying to summarize it as sort of a, hey, if you're looking to really transformationally grow your organization, how would you simply describe those first kind of steps?
So let me just restate what you said, because what I heard was that in order to be the best that you can, in order to really drive growth beyond just incremental or market rate, you need a strategic plan to identify the what and when and where. And then you need a culture plan. And you need a culture plan that really addresses the Bill.
Who and how. The who and how.
What did we say here? The culture plan.
Why, what, and how we do what we do.
Yes, the why, what, and how we do. So essentially, the big takeaway from if we're going to distill all this down, companies will either succeed or fail in today's age of acceleration, complexity, chaos, as a function of their having a culture plan for activating aligned readiness and living our values and deep ownership in moving forward. So if we can summarize today, a culture plan is one of the critical, decisive factors in how well you will thrive, survive, or fail in this age of acceleration and complexity.
Excellent. Excellent. Bill, anything missing in there, or did he summarize it?
Look, there's a lot to build on here.
Oh, yeah. But I'm talking about keeping it at the top level to share with the CEO who's trying to solve for this, to give them some practical advice that will let them envision what it is they need to do next.
Yeah, and we're happy to flush this out with any CEO who wants to have a deeper discussion about, okay, so much for the generalities. Here are the specifics of my organization. Let's talk.
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, you can reach out to us through waymakers.live and catch our prior episodes, our webinars, our other shows. Well, let's get into another thing. So we're going to get this wrapped up right now here because it's the end of our show here for Wednesday, November 17th, Waymakers Live. Now, next Wednesday is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And so I'm just going to propose, Michael, that our topic is a very informal conversation on gratitude. Perfect. And gratitude protocols and how that plays into our organization. And other than that, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you very much to the audience for joining us. This has been Chris.